Oh, yes, I'm being reminded to do screen size, so I'm going to stop the recording now and change my screen size. One moment. Okay. There we go. Okay, as usual, everyone is on mute. If you have a question that you need to ask, please type it in the questions area, and I'll keep an eye out for it. And at the end of the session, I'll unmute everyone so that we can give everyone a chance to chat. Okay, so a review of what we did in the last session. The Data Management Tools Part 1 covered the data entry form, record copying, creating equivalents, all of the bulk data management tools to add and remove codes, the find and replace tool, and so on. So it was really about your day-to-day management of the records, whereas today's session, Part 2, we're focusing on suggestions, feedback, the process of soliciting those suggestions, so things to do with getting record update information from others who are not the data manager of the record. There's going to be another session, one for volunteer and one for CIC, that will focus on data structure changes in the software, which means changing the way our fields are organized, how we store that information, additional fields that we may need, and so on. So that isn't covered in either of these sessions. That's its own section altogether. This should be relatively quick to go through. I'm going to talk about the known issues that we have in no particular order. If you need any clarity on the issues or the potential changes that we might make, please do highlight it to me so I can go into a little more detail, and then I'll hope to find out from you what other suggestions you might have. Our number one on the list, the one we hear about the most, is the ability for public feedback forms to better resemble update forms wherever it's possible and desirable. The main drive for this is to have more of those automatic update buttons that accept public feedback right into your forms without you having to copy and paste or do any work to the information. Just clicking update would accept the changes that were suggested by the public. There are a few issues with doing this. Otherwise, obviously, we would have that already. The first one is that we don't want to require that the public have JavaScript turned on. Unlike the staff side, where you do have to have JavaScript to use our entry forms, we don't want to force the public to have JavaScript in order for their forms to work. And more of our forms elements require the use of JavaScript now. So in order to truly resemble what we currently do on our entry forms, for the public, they would have to have JavaScript as well. And the problem with that is many people have JavaScript blockers on. I am one of those people who surfs the web entirely with JavaScript blocked, and I only turn it on for certain sites when I trust them and when I decide that it's required. So that is a reality of the web today. People do it to keep from being bombarded with ads, to protect their computer from spyware and all kinds of security holes and just plain annoyances. Ads that, both text and image ads can often be blocked with JavaScript, so it's very common. And we don't want to block someone from giving feedback or a new record suggestion just because they don't have JavaScript turned on. It can also mean that the behavior of the form is unpredictable. People might not necessarily know if they have JavaScript turned off that they're missing out, so it's very tricky. And the other thing is that we don't want to overwhelm the public with complex forms because unlike staff, they get no training or support to use those forms. So my major example here is the new contact forms. We chose on purpose to leave the public with the old contact forms or something very closely resembling the old contact forms because it's nice and compact, easy to use and clear, and the new contact forms that the data managers use have so many elements and are so large and complex. We were concerned that it may be overwhelming to the public to have to use such a complicated form. The drawback, of course, is now people have to do copying and pasting when people make changes to those elements. Another major example that we hear a lot is for those fields that have checklists, where you would tick off checkboxes, that we don't give any checkboxes to the public. So they're forced to actually edit the text. And in some cases, like suggesting changes on the taxonomy or the thesaurus or anything like that, they have absolutely no guidance about what information goes in that field. And that's even true of some of the simpler fields, like in the volunteer software, particularly when it talks about commitment length or anything like that, where they don't really know what to put in that box, especially if it's just an empty box. Whereas on the staff side, they get lovely little check boxes. They can just tick off the ones that apply. So it would be really nice if the public could also use those check boxes and not have to try and guess at what was desired for each of those fields. Okay, if there's no questions on that item, I'll move on. The next one is actually a security setting. So I believe most people will be aware that you can still solicit feedback on non-public and deleted records, expired records, things that are not in your view anymore. This tends to be important because sometimes people keep internal records for staff-only purposes. They don't want them on a public site, but they still need to have the ability to update that information. Unfortunately, it does mean that you do have a means of accessing information that you might otherwise like to be private. It is important to note that if you do have truly private information that you do not want anyone to be able to access except the person who has updating privileges, that on the community information side you can put a password, a feedback password on the record, and then only the person with that password would be able to access that feedback form. So there is a protection mechanism there. If anyone is actually concerned about this from a security perspective, the problem is that you are responsible for creating the password, for ensuring that the person who's doing the updating gets that password, because it doesn't automatically get sent to them. The passwords aren't generated. You have to come up with one yourself, enter it into the update form, and so on. But that mechanism is there just for anyone who has a concern that, oh no, this is a security hole. If you are worried, you can do something about it now, but we would like it to be easier for people to make decisions about how those records are made available. Just for everyone's information as well, feedback forms are always set to not be crawled by search engines, so that hopefully they won't end up in Google or in any other search engine indexed, so that people would keep ending up there even after the record was removed from the view. So that's that item. We've had a request to, even though we have a review feedback section, we have had a request to allow a search option on the advanced search page that would show which records had feedback. This is something that we've given add SQL for on the message board for anyone who did want to add this to a search that they were doing. But because not everyone has add SQL privileges or can really remember what the add SQL was to find that record with feedback, it would be nice if they could just tick a box and say, you know, show me only records with feedback or only records with no feedback, or whatever it is that they need to do. We've had a request to allow a suggestion for an equivalent or other language version of a record in the case where they may be working with a French language volunteer to provide translations for their records, and they don't actually want to give update privileges to that person. They want them to be able to come in, take an English-only record, and suggest what the translated version of that English language record would be. This will come into play even more now that we're potentially allowing other languages beyond English and French for these records. So if you have a Polish volunteer who's working with a newcomers group to identify specific records that are of interest to the Polish community, that you would let them surf your database, find records that they think should be available in Polish, and translate them without actually giving them a login is potentially a big advantage. And right now you can do that, but it's challenging in that it's not tied to the original record. They can make a new suggestion in another language, but it's not tied to the original record in any way. It comes in as a brand new record suggestion instead. And what we want to do is tie it to the existing record that you have so that you can use it to create an equivalent instead of having it come up to create a brand new record, which isn't helpful. Hopefully then you would also give that person access to the current language information while they're doing the translation so that they can give you a more effective translation. We have somewhat recently added the ability to assign new records to specific agencies. This has come up on the message boards a few times. Originally, all new record suggestions, meaning feedback that isn't about an existing record, came in completely unassigned. As we started getting larger and larger databases with more agencies in them, there was occasionally some challenges in identifying who was responsible for that new record suggestion. Those challenges come both in people taking records that maybe they really shouldn't have taken that would have been properly under the purview of someone else, or new record suggestions basically getting ignored and not picked up because no one was sure whose responsibility it was. So a relatively new feature is the ability to say a particular new record suggestion comes in. It comes in assigned to no one, but you can then assign it to an agency, and they know that they're responsible for then using that to create a new record that they would own. What we would like to do is take that a little further and have it automatically make that assignment of the new record suggestion based on some of the information that they can gather in the new record suggestion. One of those things will be the view in which that was submitted. So if we take in Hamilton, they have a child care view, which is focused on both child care centers, registry providers, and also licensed home-based agencies and other services for young children. And those records all tend to be owned by one agency in that database. And so they can have it that any record that's submitted in that view, any new record suggestion, would automatically come in assigned to that one agency, because the likelihood is that if it was submitted to that child care view, it's a child care record and rightfully is the responsibility of that group. Now, they could reassign it if that was incorrect, but it's helpful for it to do that automatically, especially in those databases where we have many, many different agencies working somewhat independently in their own little, they have their own public views where people can suggest, but when those suggestions come in, right now they go to everybody and not just the one agency who rightfully would be working with that record. It also means there's no privacy on that new submission, so take that child care suggestion, if a home registry provider comes in as a new record suggestion, everybody can see it right up until the moment that that record is created. And that's a problem because some of that information in that record is private and really shouldn't be available to anyone but the agency who deals with that registry. So by automatically assigning it and potentially saying that those new record suggestions will only then be available in certain data management views, depending on where they came from, we also give a little bit better privacy and security around those new suggestions. Okay, next, and please, if anyone has any questions, I'm watching, feel free to interrupt me. The ability for a logged-in user to submit a feedback note across multiple records at once. So if you know that a particular kind of change is coming for a group of records, that you could select that group of records and send the data managers of those records a note about those records in one go instead of having to individually go in and submit feedback on each one. And that feedback note may be about a change to the record, or it may be any kind of other information like I've reviewed the content of this record and it looks good, or whatever information that you might need to pass on to the data managers of that record. This would allow you to do it in a group instead of having to individually go in and submit feedback for each individual record that you wanted to submit the same kind of information. Again, this is more urgent now that we have multiple agencies who used to work independently working all together in the same place. The ability to have more than one default email update text. So every database has a setup area in which you can set exactly one default text for your email update requests. One for volunteer, one for CIC, and one for a special kind of volunteer record, which is called an email all update request, which is for all the opportunities that one agency has. And you can only have one default in each language for each of those things. So the idea here is that either on a view-by-view basis or at the time of sending, you would be able to select from a variety of different email update texts. The advantage of having people pick at the time of sending is if you have a special kind of email update text that you use to update for a special project or a particular purpose, then you would be able to pick at the time of sending whatever the appropriate message was for what you were trying to communicate to that agency. So it would allow a lot more flexibility, and people would have to do less copy and paste at the time of sending if they had more defaults available to them. It would also mean that each of the agencies who's sending out an update would be able to customize that message to whatever suits their community and whatever they would like to say in that message, instead of having to have every agency in the database agree on the wording. One we've had for a long time in our enhancements database is allowing the sending of a new record suggestion rejection. So I'm sure all of you have had people submit inappropriate records suggestions into your database, often businesses wanting to be listed in a community information database or other kinds of things that just don't fit with your policy of inclusion for volunteer centers that may be non-member listings, because some of our volunteer centers only do listings for members of the volunteer center. So any kind of suggestion for a new record in your database that you are not going to create a new record for, right now it's your responsibility to follow up on your own if you want to tell them why you're not going to create that record. This would allow you to have a form in which you could respond to the person who submitted the request and let them know why you're not including it if you wanted to do that. This has come up in a previous session, but I'm mentioning it again here. The ability to separate out public field help from logged-in field help. The standards that staff work to determine how information should be formed, information is required, is not the same level as what you would say to the public about what you want them to include, or how you would explain to them what the field is for. And right now, you can only do one kind of help. So whatever you write for your staff, that's what the public gets. And the idea here would be you could have a simplified field help that would be for the public, or potentially even for logged-in users who maybe are working in a leased view, where the level of field help that they need is quite different from the level of field help that your data manager needs, who has to work to standards and have very detailed information about how the field is going to be filled out. And that's my list, very simple. I'm going to open it up now. I'm going to unmute everyone, so please, if you don't want to be unmuted, feel free to remute yourself. And if your mic or phone is not working, you can also type your questions. And I'll watch you. Oh, I think I unmuted someone with a little one. Okay. So, Helen had her hand up. Did you want to type a question, Helen? Or you're unmuted, so feel free to talk. No? Okay, no comments or questions on on what I've covered? Any other concerns that people have? No? Can someone speak so I know that someone can speak?
This is Mark speaking.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. I was worried there. Something was going on. Okay, I have a question from Jennifer. Just a moment. Okay. Oh, no. Jennifer's saying she can hear me. Well, that's good, Jennifer. Diane is saying there are times where she'd like to be able to access feedback for a specific record or groups of records after updating the record. So, Diane, you can keep the feedback when you update the record if you want to. That's an option at the bottom of the form where you decide whether or not you want to keep the feedback. So did you need something beyond that? Because there's a yes, no, delete feedback at the bottom of every entry form.
Hi, Kate. It's Diane. I do realize that. It's just sometimes we've had instances where in our mind, we've followed the instructions, but and afterwards someone will be challenging us when we know that, we had received instruction, and sometimes it would just be wonderful to be able to go back and say, well, this is what we received and who we received it from,
Yep. So best practice. Do you get your emails? Do you get your feedback emails?
Yes.
The best practice is to keep those for 6 months to a year. I think there's actually an AIR standard about how long you're supposed to keep those for an informant, right? So you're actually supposed to be keeping your feedback emails, and you should let us know if you don't get them. Sometimes it's your ISP that drops it, and all we can do is help you to talk to your ISP and tell you, spam filter our emails away. But that is actually what you should be doing for that very reason, is that you then can go back. If you want, you can make folders. If you make folders in your email client and sort of file each month's feedback away in that month, then it makes it really easy to go back and find it. And because the record number is in the subject of the feedback message, it's actually really easy to find that feedback again.
Okay. That's great. Thanks, Kate.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Mayra, you've got your hand up and a question. Here we go. All right. Mayra has a question regarding the new record suggestion assignment. If you have more than one agency using the same view, will this enhancement still auto-assign? How would this work? Thank you, because I actually wrote this in my presentation and I didn't say it out loud. So I'm going to go back. Here we go. The view they were submitted and or the suggested location of the record. So this is the key part that I left out when I was talking. That potentially it would be a combination of the view they submitted in and if they fill in a located in community. Like let's say they said located in Windsor. So you could say, okay, so any record that's submitted in this view and has a located in that's either in Windsor or any part of Windsor automatically gets assigned to this agency. So, we can use more than one piece of information to do the assignment, and it may be a combination of the view and the location that allows you to determine where it goes, if there's more than one agency in a view. Does that clarify for you, Mayra? Sorry I left that out when I was speaking, but I don't want to read right off the PowerPoint slides, or what would be the point? Okay, one more question from Mayra, which I think she's typing out. Who would configure this? You would. So we would only build into the software, think of it like mail filters. So for those of you who set up email filters, you don't necessarily set it up for every email that you ever get. But you may know that under certain circumstances, if these conditions are true, if the from is this and the subject is this, I want you to file it in this folder. It would be just like a mail filter. So by default, some of your records are still going to come in not assigned to anyone. But you would be able to set up conditions like if this was submitted in this view and was located in this community, auto-assign it to this group, like that. Okay, that seems to clear it up. Good. Any other questions? I think the biggest, most challenging one for us is going to be this one. And what we may have to do to meet this need is give people choices. So let's take the contact form as an example, that we would give people a choice if they wanted to use the really crazy complicated contact form on their feedback form because they really wanted to be able to use those update buttons, then we would let them, but it would be their choice, and they would have to feel comfortable with that. And for those who wanted the simplified form, then they could do that too. So it's going to take a bit of thought, and we may not do them all at once, but our goal is to do as many of those as we can realistically do. You know, and as I say, it may be a few at a time. Like maybe we start out with some of the simple checklist fields, and then we move on and do the contact fields and so on. So that's the idea with that. Okay. Any other questions? No? Because this will be the shortest session. Yeah.
It's Mark. I just have a question about the feedback forms and the JavaScript. Is that kind of an industry standard around not forcing JavaScript, or is that just your preference that the public isn't required to have JavaScript for this?
There's no standard with this. So you have some sites who try and make at least a basic user experience work without JavaScript.
Yeah, which is what CIOCs do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no critical function of the public that requires either cookies or JavaScript. And that
would it not be possible to kind of just make something on the forms that say, you know, in order to effectively use this form, you do need JavaScript turned on to get rid of all these things you have to do to work around JavaScript to get them to resemble the update forms?
The challenge with that is that anything you do that has an increased requirement of the user, you risk them leaving and not doing it.
Okay.
And
I know there's, I know there's certainly good reasons behind your thinking. I'm just trying to understand what they are.
Yeah, well, there's a few things. One is when you start using JavaScript, you begin to have browser requirements as well. Like it doesn't just stop at, oh, they have to have JavaScript on. As soon as you're using JavaScript, every browser does it a little bit differently in terms of the style sheet support they have and how things work. And so as soon as you start down that path, it's not just about requiring JavaScript anymore. It's also about, oh, they have to have at least this version of Internet Explorer, and they have to have at least this and that. And so it just makes piles on more and more requirements of the user in order for them to do the task.
Right.
So
I would imagine
it's more than just JavaScript. Once you start that path, your base level of what you expect of your users goes way up.
Right. Plus your ongoing development would be complicated, wouldn't it?
Oh,
like
yeah.
Once it's on.
You would have to test in so many more browsers because it's not basic HTML anymore. It's not, you know, it just gets much more complex. And we certainly, for the staff, we don't mind saying, you know, here are the list of browsers that we're going to support for our logged in users. If you want to use the software, you have to use one of those. But you can't make that kind of demand of the public because they're going to use whatever they want. And if they want to sit there and use their iPad, you know, or their Wii, or play, you know, whatever, their PlayStation 3, they're going to use whatever they want. And we have no control over that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I have a question. Okay. Diane's asking, is it necessary for the subject field to be included in the feedback form? You have total control over whether or not you include that field, and my understanding is that not everyone does include the subject field because because you're right, Diane, they assume they can just make up their own subjects and have it be anything they want. So I think those who do include the subject field, they have to then take the responsibility to try and interpret the information that's provided to them because it won't be from the official thesaurus. But in the end, it's your choice. If you don't want to include the subjects on the form because you want to be in complete control of that, and that's certainly what happens with the taxonomies. You know, the people, I don't think, feel there's a lot of point in letting the public modify the taxonomy because it's too complicated. But at the same time, you miss out on an opportunity to find out from the public if something has been misclassified, if you don't even give them the chance to edit what is there. So it's a bit challenging. Does that answer your question, Diane? Okay. Jennifer's asking, is there an easy way to search for broken links? There are services on the web that will crawl your site for broken links. We don't have a link checker built in currently. That's about all I can say about that.
There are some add-ons if you use Firefox that you can use on a result list. It's something I did when I had free time. You know, to get your whatever group of records up on the screen, display the web page field, and then run a Firefox add-on called Link Checker, and it basically checks all the links on the screen.
Right, right. And there's remote services that do it, but yeah, the Firefox add-on is a good idea, Mark. Thanks.
Yeah, you don't get into having to use distribution codes, and you know it's not a quick, easy system, and it's not foolproof either, because the link might just be offline for a minute or two, and it's going to come back as broken. So, yeah. I mean, it's not perfect, but it is one way to check links.
And the other thing that was covered in our stat session, for those of you who weren't there, is that if you go into the stats tool, the weblog tool, so not the one that's built into the software, but the weblog tool, and you go and look at your 404 list, you can often find malformed links where you typed the link in wrong in some way. Usually that's in the description field, not in the actual website field, but in the description field. That often turns up some really odd bad links. So that's another place to be looking if you're concerned about bad links. It doesn't catch ones where you've typed in the wrong address, but it does catch ones where you say forgot the HTTP in a link in a description or something like that. So that's another hint there. But certainly setting up your descriptions and your www address fields, wherever you keep links in your search results, and then using a link checker tool, either that Firefox add-on that Mark mentioned, or if you just check link checker, search link checker on Google, you'll find a million services and tools for checking links. That's a relatively easy way to identify, at least screen, which ones are likely to be problems. Okay. I mean, it's not impossible that we can build link checker tools in, even if it's just to sort of say, is it there? But the reality is it's never going to actually visit the site and see if it's correct. And that's something you should be doing anyway, for the main reason that we have had members contact us in a panic because some site that they were linking to suddenly turned into a porn site. Whoops. When people fail to renew their domains and a squatter comes along and buys it up. This has happened to government sites and all kinds of things like that. So no one is immune. Where some IT person forgets to do their job and renew that domain, and someone snatches it up really fast, and it's no longer the site you think it is. So, and sometimes, even though the link resolves, meaning a page comes up, that page that it was linking to may not have the right content on it anymore, or may, you know, just have a message saying this content has moved. And if you don't take the time to actually click on that link and look at where it goes, even a link checker is not going to fix that problem for you. So in the end, you still have to take responsibility to, when you're updating the record, at the time you're updating it, to follow through on every link that you have in that record and make sure that it still turns up what you think it should.
I know in Hamilton, Muslim Association ended up with a bunch of porn site web links, which was not good. We let them know. I mean, that was something they didn't even know.
Our worst case was...
Go ahead. Yep.
our worst case was this was really terrible, was a women's sexual assault center, and the website had been, like you say, probably lapsed or whatever, and it was a porn site. So sexually assaulted women looking for help would have come up with a porn site. That was horrendous, but only found when we checked the websites.
Well, that's the sad thing, is you can actually be doing some of these organizations a favor, because some of them never look at their own website and honestly don't know that this has happened until someone lets them know.
Yeah.
So you're also doing all of these organizations a favor by regularly checking to make sure that that information is what it should be. Okay, question from Mayra. One moment. Okay. Mayra has a question regarding supported browsers for logged-in users. They have some logged-in users that have to use IE that can't use Firefox. Do we support IE for logged-in users? We do, although we really don't want you to use 6. 7 and above. And you should also be aware that we've seen problems with the Google Maps scripts timing out in older versions of Internet Explorer, and maybe even in some of the sort of newer ones. But so that is a known issue, that the Google Maps script could kind of lock on you and time out. In Internet, we can't. We don't write the Google Maps script, so all we can do is upgrade the version of the script that we're using, which is an enhancement on our list. But we do support IE 7 and above for logged-in users, but not 6. I shouldn't say that. We try and support 6, but we don't guarantee support for 6 and everything. But we test logged in for Chrome, but we don't promise that Chrome works. We test Safari, but we don't promise that Safari works. Firefox is fully supported, and IE 7 and up is fully supported.
Kate, is the back button still an issue in IE with forms?
Not new versions of IE. 8 and above are fine.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, so new versions of IE we have absolutely no problem with. We fully support those. We have a lot of, you're not the only member, Mayra, that has to use IE. We have some government members that will never get off IE. That's all they're allowed to use. So we absolutely do support IE. Mayra's asking, is the back button an issue with IE 7? I think it's still an issue with 7. I don't think they fixed it till 8. But Chris is the browser dude, not me. So he would have to confirm which version it got corrected in. I do know that it's fixed, at least as of 8. Absolutely fixed in 8. 7, I'm not sure if it was fixed in 7, but it's absolutely fixed in 8. You should still be careful with the back button because, and that's true not just on CIOC, but on a lot of modern websites. Most modern websites aren't really designed to work with the back button, which sounds crazy since it's such a basic web tool to use the back button. But because of the way a lot of modern websites fetch their information, where they don't actually reload the page, but they change the page while you're looking at it, using the back button can cause some very strange behavior. And we put special things in to try and cope with that and make sure that you don't have anything weird happen when you use the back button. But be aware that using the back button in general is not as safe on the internet as it used to be and can cause really strange behavior, especially with forms. Mary's saying they're government run, so they have to use IE. You're not alone. And actually, the newer versions of IE really have come a long way. If you look at 8 or 9, in terms of their performance and their features and support, it really is coming much more towards standards and is not as much of a headache for us to support. Mary's saying the back button issue is not IE isolated as a whole. That particular back button issue that we're talking about, which is forms going resetting when you use the back button, that is a totally old IE issue. We've never encountered that with another browser. But there are other kinds of weird back button things that can happen on websites that people may not notice. And again, that's just a artifact of the way that modern websites are designed because of dynamically changing pages where you can click buttons and have the page change without leaving the page. An example would be the new internal memo field where you can keep clicking that add button and adding new things in. That doesn't reload the page, but it changes the page while you're working in it. And not every site that you're going to visit properly deals with, if someone leaves the page and comes back, to regenerate all that stuff that you had added into your forms or your pages. We try to do that. We try and make sure that we deal with the back button. We know people are going to use it by instinct. It's just something to be aware of, that if you're provided a link to navigate back to a menu or something else, you should use the link and not the back button, because it's less likely to cause you trouble. But we certainly try not to introduce any strange back button behavior in CIOC. All right. Anything else that you would like to cover? We have tons of time, so if there's any data management issues that weren't covered in the last session that you'd like me to cover now, feel free to do that as well. Otherwise, you'll just get an early exit and get to your weekend quicker, I guess. No? Okay. I'm going to assume that we're all good then, and we'll wrap up the session nice and early today. There's no sessions next week. So the next session that we have is actually the week after. And there are going to be 2 sessions that aren't going to be run by me that will probably happen in April or later, which aren't listed. One is going to be on data audit and peer review tools, so quality assurance tools basically. And the other is going to be on multi-member databases. So do be on the lookout for those sessions. They won't be part of the list that I'm working on, which ends at the end of March, but they will, they'll have information from me, and Chris will be listening in, and some members of our development committee will run those sessions. So those will happen a little bit later on. Thanks very much. I hope everyone has a good weekend.
Thanks everyone for coming. That ends the session, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay, take care.